But I got to say, I'm glad I'm at this point in the conference, because having gone through the sessions yesterday and listened to all of the presentations today, it kind of culminates with what we're going to talk about as far as the challenges. Actually, once you decide what you want to do, actually, implementing it and operationalizing it. So, some of those challenges can be really, really complex, and mostly due to most of us, if not all of us, work in large matrix organizations with lots of business lines and legacy perceptions on what's the right way to do things and who owns the customers. And that it really kind of plays into a lot of that. So before we get started, why don't we jump in to do a quick round of introductions. Scott, you want to go first?
Yes, Scott Furlong. I've lived at State Street Global Advisors for almost 3 years now, doing a major digital transformation project stemming from the site itself to the underlying infrastructure supporting the site. So it's been an incredible journey, and before that I've worked with a few people that aren't around the room anymore. A lot of the Fidelity folks I've worked with, there's a Liberty Mutual connection. Christine in the back there actually hired me into State Street. So thank you, I think. And I've worked for Staples, TIA, Kraft, so I've been around the block.
Martin Davis, I'm a design director at USAA. I've been there for about 3 years now. That was a pretty big shift for me to go from kind of long time in agencies to go in-house. What we're trying to do, in addition to making better products and experiences for our members, is really trying to help be the catalyst for bringing human-centered design and design thinking into the whole organization at large. And when I say at large, it's like 35 to 60,000 people, depending on how you cut it up. So happy to answer any of those kinds of questions anybody has. And I think, transformation. I was brought into Citizens almost 4 years ago to create a core competency for digital engagement, which didn't exist. So when I arrived, if you were using online banking or using the mobile app, or you were on our public website and you had questions, your primary go-to strategy was to get on the phone and get an answer to your question. And that delivers, from an NPS and a top box perspective, as soon as you ask them to leave the channel, their channel of choice, the satisfaction levels drop precipitously. So I was charged with creating digital care and build, for all of our digital assets, through all of our channels, and building a core competency through multiple business lines, as well as considering the contact center as a business line, so that we could not only service them, today, but also have a roadmap for moving to, being able to deliver interactively through AI content, as well as virtual assistants on the roadmap as well. So, and that's what we did. So, with that said, before we get to really digging into, we thought that transformation is a really overused term. I think it was mentioned by at least a couple different people here over the last couple of days. So for the purpose of this discussion, I thought we would articulate what the definition that we're going to use of transformation. So, Scott, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start. Ours was holistic. So we looked at redesigning the site, but understanding and kind of the cause for it was, some of you may or may not be aware of Fearless Girl, so the statue that stood across from the Bull in Wall Street, which was a fabulous, I can't remember the multiple million impressions it had, but it equated to anywhere from between $18 million and $30 million of free advertising. It generated a big goose egg of business. Because nobody associated it with State Street Global Advisors. Nobody knew who State Street Global Advisors was. So it was this tremendous viral opportunity that everybody dreams about that went flat. And so it was, okay, well, what do? We need to present a storefront to our customers. And what is that storefront? That's all the products and services that we provide, interconnected, We had about 30 different microsites that sat everywhere. There was very little internal compass for UX. So you could see which agency designed what on the sites. We didn't have a content strategy. And then there was all this, well, so what? We get a website, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for distribution? What does that mean for our product people? How does that all tie together? And so it was thinking about it in a bigger experience standpoint of, here's our site, and when somebody touches it, can we track that? When they come in from a direct email through Marketo, can we track that? How does that connect with Salesforce? Does that all go into a marketing database where we can actually put that all together and say, well, what does this mean? When Martin goes on and actually puts his email to register for an event, oh no, now I know who Martin is. That IP address has a person to it, and actually we now have a persona that is based on Martin's behavior over the last year or two. When did he visit the site, and when did that trigger a sale? When did that trigger a conversation with one of our sales folks? So we have a better idea of how we're all integrated from top to bottom. But that's all just technology, because there's still people and process that's part of that. So it's also addressing the behavior of the organization, of how they support that. Because if you just have the technology, that doesn't, we've heard a lot of it. There's a human element to this that's been a strong theme over the last day and a half. And if you lose that, it's just technology. It's not going to solve your problem. I often tease colleagues and senior management of like, oh yeah, when we get Marketo, that's going to fix everything. That's going to turn our sales around. We're going to, all of a sudden, we're not going to be bleeding money in our asset management. We're going to head north again. But that's not the reality.
Yeah, I think for us, shortly before myself and a number of other design directors, just to be clear, I am not the director. I am one of many directors, so I have a certain sphere of influence that's only so big. But, design sat within IT, or software development, but we call it IT, right? So, it was very executional. So you've got a really well-entrenched mindset of, hey, the business and technology is going to come up with what we should do, and now we need it to appear on a screen for folks, right? And so what we've done, so obviously when you try to get a team together, so my team is pretty well representative of a number of teams, and that we're sort of set up to go kind of soup to nuts, from either you have a problem or you have a problem that you need to find out is not the correct problem to solve, to for research, service design, interaction design, visual design, to produce thing in a person's hands. That's a very different way to work for our partners throughout the business. So multi kind of dimensions to trying to operationalize that. A lot of what we do is we've broken up into different practices. So, our design language system helps establish governance to let people understand what a better standard, a better quality, a better level of craft, how accessibility should be involved. We have a team that teaches folks in the business about human-centered design methods so that they're better able to approach their problems differently, and also then when they meet up with me, they understand kind of what I have to offer. And then I'm always trying to just make net promoters from within all the time, because the best thing I can do is make happy people who want more of what we have to offer, or who are telling people like, yeah, I worked with the design team and they did this. You should work with them so they can do that for you. So that's kind of how my approach is. Oh, and I'm also a bulldog. So a polite, political bulldog.
But that's such a great point there of the user experience should be user-friendly themselves. And that was we just heard that before of the gardening metaphor. And I think that is so true, because when we talk about product owners that are in the room and how we coexist, and I think that's a real good way of thinking, a healthy way of thinking of this co-creation model of coming together and collaborating on the strategy. And because you hear a lot of same things of what we're trying to achieve, and there's a lot of efficiencies there when we're all being asked to do more with less. There's a lot of ways to get to that, where the research comes together at the same time, and what you're trying to achieve is all the same thing.
So that sounded pretty loud there. I think I got to tone it down a little bit. In the world that I was working in, it was So we were fundamentally creating, a new channel for our customers so that they could stay within their channel of choice. Fundamentally, what that meant was a culture shift, because now we're taking a contact center, which was used to taking care of the customers through phone, and the closest they got to digital was email, but for me, that doesn't count. And so we're taking the contact center into the digital world, and that was a real shift for the contact center. They wanted to do it. There was no pushback. They understood why they had to go into the digital area, but they didn't understand what it meant to do that, how the culture had to be different at the agent level, and what it looked like when it was done correctly. One of the biggest areas of transformation was dealing with all the silos without making them go away, but create a situation where the digital agents could talk about all the products. So in a traditional sense, and this is probably the same with most banks, you've got student lending, you've got unsecured lending, you've got checking and deposits, and they're all different groups of agents that sit in different areas. And if you as a prospective customer have a goal that you're looking to achieve that involves multiple products, you're forced to make several phone calls, sit in a phone queue for 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer, depending on the time of year. And none of them can compare or contrast some of the other things that you're looking at. So the challenge was, we refused to, in digital, to create yet another siloed function within the bank, because that just didn't work. If we were going to connect with somebody in digital, we had to be able to talk to them about any products. So we actually found a way to do it, but it required a lot of heavy lifting to get to where we needed to be. We actually created a digital team that was cross-product, negotiated with the business line so that their trainers trained these agents, and they could talk to you about anything. And they also had some fundamental knowledge, basic by looking at personalization and big data. It was simplistic by that standard, but we were moving in a direction. What I mean by that is that agent could see, on their dashboard, well, wait a minute, this person was on the college savings page, and then they moved to, the education refinance loan pages, and then they moved to HELOC. The agent could see that and then say, I see that you're looking at these different things. What are you trying to accomplish? Well, through asking that question, what they're trying to accomplish is they're trying to figure out a way to, say, for their kids going to college. One's in middle school, one's a sophomore in high school, and so they have their own education loans, so they want to refinance that. They're looking at savings plans, and of course they had amassed some debt, so they were looking at HELOC to consolidate that debt at a lower interest rate. But you wouldn't know that if you were a HELOC agent just dealing with this person, because you wouldn't see that, so you'd just be trying to sell them a home equity line of credit as opposed to actually solving whatever their problem is. And so that's the direction we are moving in. So if we could, and there are boundaries, you look at us, they're HELOC agents, mortgage agents, they're licensed, okay, so you can't make that go away. So there has to be rules of engagement as to when a digital agent has to send that on to the other business line to make sure that you're compliant. So we've got to a point where we could handle about 80% from beginning to end of the conversations. That was I thought that was pretty astounding. And then what we did was we created chat functions within the business lines. And we in digital got to handpick the agents involved, because not every phone agent is a good digital agent. You're handling multiple conversations, understanding the intent and context and emotion through the written word as opposed to on the phone. You don't have the voice inflection. It's different, and some people are good at it and some aren't. So we get to handpick. So if we did have to escalate to the HELOC team in Cincinnati, there was chat agents that we could transfer them to real time, as opposed to them getting off the chat and then having to sit in a phone queue for 10 minutes. So we were able to accomplish all that, but that was a massive shift, and it took over a year and a half worth of work to get to that point. But it was worth it because the results that we achieved. So that's one area where what transformation meant for citizens in this area. So let's back up just a little bit. So we acknowledge that there's lots of challenges, old structures, some people may be resistant, all that other good stuff. So looking at good planning right from the start, how can we actually, conceive whatever it is we're looking to do right up front, so we perhaps minimize or actually eliminate some of the challenges. I know in prior conversations there was discussions relative to, I think, Martin, you used the term doing the work up front kind of concept.
I try to show more than tell as much as I can. I think I feel like I'm always building a case study that I can always pull from at any moment and trying to help folks see how it's going to work for them. I think that early on there were a lot of instances where folks were trying to model out, like, here's what it's like to work with design, and models are great, and I think designers like to make models. I know I do, but a model's an abstraction, and I think it's hard for folks to see themselves in it. So I think, as much as you can just kind of like make to help people think and see what you're doing, I think is really critical. It's super important. Just doing is the highest value, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's abstract unless you do that, and it's hard for people to get their heads wrapped around it. And at State Street, because we didn't have a strong UX presence, we'd have the agency roll in and out, and so it didn't have that internal compass. So it was really important in the initial stage, the phase one of our digital transformation, was to pick some key pages throughout our site and deliver on that, and that gave us momentum and swagger to go on for the bigger project, because everybody saw it and it was evident to them. It was very clear, because we took a content approach to it. We recrafted our branding message as part of that redesign and the new brand, and so it was right up to our CEO, and everybody was seeing it and then going, well, why aren't we doing this in other places across our business lines? So it gave us some great momentum to dive in and tackle. So we carved off a little piece of the mountain first, and that allowed us to demonstrate as Martin.
Yeah. I remember being really upset because I was like, I wish I could show people a portfolio of work that I had done before this, but that's not going to matter to them. Because I kind of coming in, it's like, oh, what's the case study I'm going to talk to you about? And it's like, oh, these aren't relevant to you. So it was a kind of struggle at first in that regard.
Because it's collaborative, they're part of it too. So they're along with it. They're from point A to point B.
Yeah, creating investment amongst all partners and be as collaborative as possible. Let other people have your idea is really
Check the ego at the door. Yeah.
Letting when someone else has your idea, you succeeded, and just pat them on the back and carry out what they told you to do.
Yeah, but buy-in is what it's all about. What we did at Citizens was we built a core team at the beginning, before any planning was done, and every stakeholder that needed to be on that core team, we made it a small agile group. So we didn't want to have 30, 40 people and have this big congressional committee and get nothing done. We had a core team of all the key people that need to be there. It was under a dozen people, and that team stayed with it from beginning to end. I led that group, but they, to your point, they co-authored the plan. They owned it. And that was really helpful because we did run into challenges. We did run into setbacks with resilience and security, on certain matters. We ran into resistance from some of the business lines, but because we had some key stakeholders from the business lines, from contact center, we were, as well as digital, we were able to, when those challenges came up, we had people that were part of the team that were from those areas that were creating the challenges that were basically 100% for this, because their signature was on the the plan as well. So that was probably the most valuable piece. And I think the other thing that that was a key piece is knowing when to bring vendors in to be part of that team. It's not in the beginning, right at the beginning in many cases, and it wasn't with us, but we brought in our digital engagement platform partner at the right stage so that we could get their involvement early on before we communicated dates as to what the scope was, their input into what that scope is, because they got a lot of experience doing this with other people, right? And get their commitment to the timeline that we wanted to communicate internally. And if they couldn't, then we had to revise the scope so that we could actually do that or find another way to get some more resources on it, that kind of thing. And, you know, because you can't anticipate everything, it's impossible. But if you got that group of people that just are 100%, 110% for it, you know, it goes a long way to be able to deal with the problems when they come along.
I think we can go to maybe questions now.
Our first question is for Martin in particular. USAA is known as a customer-centric culture. Is it dysfunctional, like Stephen Gates said all companies are, in getting things done?
Yes. It's overly complicated for a number of reasons. But yeah, I think it's got its particular dysfunction, but I think like everybody else does. It's interesting, I heard folks talking about branches and strategies like that, like, doesn't mean anything to me. But I would say part of USAA, here's some of the problems I think to solve at sort of tactical levels and then at some levels strategically. Everybody, I mean, we've all done competitive on each other. It's cool. We know what works and what doesn't. You know, so USA's beloved service to its members over the phone, I think that we've historically had digital experiences that leave people lacking, and then they get solved on the phone. And so it's like, oh, you have this, I forget the name of the syndrome. It's like Florence Nightingale kind of thing, right? Like, oh, I love you guys. I mean, we do take care of people, and we are very member focused. But I think that, you know, we should have to handle less things that way. I mean, with the work that my team's done around advice and around one-to-one relationships and around retirement income, we try to strike the right balance between where people want the autonomy to do things on their own and where they want the reassurance of talking to someone. And I think that's the right way to leverage those kinds of channels for us. But yeah, there's the phrase that comes to mind. I can't remember who said it, but it's like there's this gravity of kind of business as usual. And so if you know how to do a thing and you can do it really well, you can gain weaknesses in other areas. So I think those are some of those challenges.
And here's a question for the whole group. How do you measure transformational efforts?
Wow. So how we're attempting to do it is we had about 3.5 million users to our site last year. Our sales team can only address about 150,000 of those calls that they can reach out to. We know that there's in some cases about a 70% correlation between a visit to the site and the sale of one of our ETF products. So we've got these baseline metrics, and I'm very cautious about those things because they inform. They're not. I wouldn't put my hand on the Bible for them. But what we want to do is we've taken this funnel approach to our website of the awareness, interest, decision, action, and helping to increase that user's journey through that funnel and enhance it so that when those calls happen, that those calls can be informed calls because we have all that information is placed in the marketing database, and so that we start to understand what's a true opportunity so we can start to, with the Salesforce integration, start to inform our distribution so they have a better, more productive call when they do that. It's no longer a cold call or a follow-up call. It's like, oh, I know that they're interested now because they've gone to our site 3 times and they've looked at this investment type product. In the last week, they're ready. They need a push. They're looking for that last little bit of information to trigger that event, that sale. So those are things that we're looking at now. We're looking at things like bounce rate. We're looking at our Google search is up on the initial sites that we've launched, and the new design is up over approximately 50%. So people are finding us easier. So it's addressing some of the brand issues that we had before that nobody knew who State Street was, and we weren't coming up in that first page of results on Google.
And our final question, do you think it matters where people sit So many times companies want to physically move people closer together.
I mean, personally, I work an hour and a half from the home office, the headquarters. We have a lot of teams that are distributed. I think that they make it work really well. Who's another praise for Mural. I think that you lose a certain kind of your finger on the pulse of what's happening around like the actual physical space, but I think you're able to work effectively by not being directly there. That's my experience.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. So, with what we were doing, we had people in 3 states. I think you got to communicate, actually over-communicate. With the prior question on, metric, what's your success criteria? You got to carefully measure that, define it up front as part of the business case to get approval to do it, and then measure it and communicate that often. But yeah, you can effectively manage it, with teams in different locations.